We're going to be taking a look at some of the Rav's insights into Parshas BeShalach. And at the very beginning of the Parsha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu declares, Amar Elokim, that we're afraid of the Mitzrim, or we're afraid of what's going to happen during the years on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and there'll be Milchama and so forth and so on. And it says, Lo Nachem Elokim derech Eretz Plishtim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes them in a circuitous route, and Vayasev Elokim es ha'am derech Hamidbar Yamsuf. And the English translation has it as God led the people around. That's going to be one of the key words here. So first of all, why does the Torah, in this pasuk at the opening verse of BeShalach, say V'lo Nochem Elokim, which is the name of God that reflects the creation? All of Parshas Brias HaOlam, meaning Gracious Aleph, is identified as Elokim. That's the God of the natural order of the universe. And perhaps we could say the following, that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei indicates a certain supernatural approach to the universe of the Almighty. And from that perspective, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Bnei Yisrael could have reached their destination, the land of Israel, not in 40 years, but in 40 days, or in a few days. And yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not manifest himself in the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, but rather the name Elokim, which indicates a very slow process. Not like Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is supernatural, bang, immediately. Now, in truth, if it would have been Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Moshe Rabbeinu would have led the people directly into Eretz Canaan, and he would have defeated the Malachim, the kings of Canaan, and it would have been an immediate Achris Hayomim. We would have just been able to achieve Melech HaMashiach. Moshe Rabbeinu would have been the Mashiach. We would have defeated our enemies. We would not have to leave and be exiled from the land of Israel and face all the different destructions, the Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, all the expulsions. On the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem would have provided all the protection that we would need, and would achieve the ultimate goal of Jewish history immediately. However, the name Elokim, Midas Hadin, already foretells and foreshadows the tragedies and the Churbanos that would in the future take place. And that means that Moshe Rabbeinu will lead the people into the Midbar, and through a circuitous route that will take 40 years, Moshe Rabbeinu will die in the desert. That's Elokim. And basically, this is a reflection of the situation of the Jewish people throughout the exile, and even today, the process of redemption to achieve the ultimate Achris Hayomim, the redemption, is a very slow process. And we're going to be subject to many difficulties, barriers. Our enemies will accuse us of all sorts of different things. And that slow process, which is being implemented here, when Bnei Yisrael go from Mitzrayim into the desert for 40 years, that gives us the perspective of Elokim, and that is what Jewish history is all about. But Rav Soloveichik puts a tremendous emphasis on the use of the word vayasev, which literally, as we said before, God led the people around. And here, Rav Soloveichik quotes a medrash. The medrash says that on the night of the Seder, we recline, we do a seba. And the haseba comes from the word vayasev here in Parshas BeShalach. And even a poor person must not eat at the Seder until he reclines Pachi Yesev. For this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be, did to them, as it says, Vayasev Elokim. So Rav Soloveichik was wondering about this medrash. What's the relationship between God causing the people of Israel to go in a circuitous route in the desert and the mitzvah of Haseba on the night of the Seder? The mitzvah of Haseba is laharos es atzmo kiluhu yotze Mitzrayim, to reenact the exodus from Egypt through the act of reclining, demonstrating one's freedom. For a poor person, it's difficult for him to perform a reenactment of freedom, since a poor person is to some extent dependent upon others. He's not free in that sense. If I could add, it's a little bit similar to Avdus, where the Eved is totally dependent upon his master, and we as poor people are dependent upon others. We're not sufficient, we're not independently sufficient, self-sufficient. Now, when we get to the end of Pesach, which is the 7th day, the anniversary of Kriyas Yamsuf, and we achieve the culmination of this entire holiday of Pesach, in a sense, the 40-long years that we were in the Midbar until we finally entered into the land of Israel and completed the redemption, all this has not taken place yet. As we said before, we're still far, or hopefully not too far, from redemption. And the path of Jewish history has always been Vayasev, right? We know that Klal Yisrael took a roundabout route, and in that symbolism of all our exile, we have to demonstrate faith and trust in Hashem. And we wait for the fulfillment of his promise to bring about the ultimate redemption. We feel that we are in a circuitous route towards the redemption. And during our history, we suffered, as we said before, expulsion, oppression. So now comes the Seder night. And on this night, we recline. Why? Because we have an obligation, a mandate to reenact redemption. But our experience is like that of a very poor person. We face, as a people, as a nation in Golus and exile, difficulties, hardships. As we said before, the redemption is not within reach. We're suffering from different kinds of oppression and expulsions, and this is represented by poverty. So God led his people in a roundabout manner. Vayasev Elokim es ha'am. Nevertheless, he promised redemption. And at the end of the 40 years, Hashem promises we will enter into the land. And the difficulty of Heseba, the challenge of Heseba, is that we're still facing all these difficulties. We don't see the redemption in front of our eyes. It's Vayaseh. On the contrary, God is taking us in a historical path that's circuitous, that's a roundabout way. And yet we rely with tremendous faith and optimism on God's promise of redemption. And that's what Heseba is all about. Heseba means we're like the ani, the poor person who's dependent. How can he recline and demonstrate independence and freedom? But nevertheless, we're commanded to do so. And even the ani of Yisrael is obligated to Heseba on this night as an act of faith and trust that the promises of Hashem of redemption will be fulfilled, will be realized. And Rav Soloveichik quotes the basic geometric rule that the shortest distance between 2 points, is a straight line. But if you look at Jewish history, there's no straight line over here. All we see over and over again are deviations from the straight line, from the pattern of moving towards the Geula. We see that the movement in Jewish history is sometimes not the shortest route, but rather the longest route. That's the destiny of the Jewish people. Our pattern in history is the zigzag pattern, which is violation of the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. We seem to be approaching our destiny, and then suddenly we're deflected. We're thrust aside. We had the 6-Day War, I would add, and then the Yom Kippur War, which was such a difficult war. So we are deflected and thrust aside. We're forced to move sometimes in the opposite directions. We achieve positions, and then we have to abandon them. We accomplish whatever we accomplish, and then generations are just wiped off the map. Yishuvim are built up, and then they are annihilated. And we have to start anew. So this process, Rav Soloveichik calls historical detours. And our history is unlike the history of any other nation, which seems to be moving more or less in a straight line. But our move towards Geula, even when it seems to be beckoning to us and inspiring us, nevertheless, there are detours. There are zigzags, and we don't move in a straight line. Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. Pasuk Yutes. The Jewish people on this night are ready for the exodus from Egypt, and the Midrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu is busy looking for the coffin of Yosef. What is the significance of this emphasis in Chazal about Moshe's preoccupation with the coffin of Yosef on the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Moshe Rabbeinu acknowledges the importance of Yosef, his spiritual mission, his inspiration to the people of Israel. He's the paradigm of Jewish commitment in exile. Moshe Rabbeinu realized that we're going out of Mitzrayim, but yet we're still in exile. We're still going to have 40 years in that roundabout route in the Midbar. And we need Yosef. Yosef's inspiration is because he demonstrated a Jew can identify as a Jew and fulfill the Jewish precepts, even as a slave in poverty, and even in the royal grandeur as the viceroy of the greatest civilization of its time, Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu feels that without the example of Yosef, without his precedent, the Jews could not have endured all those centuries of enslavement in Egypt. So Moshe Rabbeinu dedicates himself to this task. Moshe Rabbeinu is a grandson of Levi. Who is Levi in his relationship with Yosef? Levi is the antagonist of Yosef. Levi was the scoffer of Yosef. He himself was the one who, when Yosef recounted his dreams, he scoffed at the dreams of Yosef. But now comes Levi's grandson, Moshe Rabbeinu, and acknowledges that there was a mistake over here, that we didn't recognize the super central, powerful submission in the spiritual realm of Yosef that would allow us to experience the exile and maintain our commitment to Hashem. The Gemara says in Sotan Daf Chaf, Moshe Rabbeinu took Joseph's bones with him in his abode. Moshe both physically carried Joseph's coffin and internalized Joseph's legacy. He acknowledged that the entire nation owed an everlasting gratitude to Yosef, not only for their physical well-being, which is the first of Yosef's two dreams, but also, and perhaps more importantly, for his spiritual leadership, for his paradigmic example as represented in the second dream, in the spiritual leadership and inspiration of Yosef. And perhaps we could suggest that this recognition of Yosef, belated, right, only by Moshe Rabbeinu at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, this is a fulfillment of the second dream. What was the second dream of Yosef? The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars prostrating themselves to me. Here's the most beautiful example of prostrating themselves to Yosef, meaning to, accept Yosef's greatness. Moshe is carrying Yosef's coffin on his shoulders, recognizing and acknowledging Yosef's unique spiritual contribution, his mission on this earth. And this is all a validation of Yosef when Moshe carries the coffin of Yosef on his shoulders. And that's the fulfillment of the second dream of Yosef. We fast forward now to Perek Yud Dalet, Pasuk Dalet. V'chizakti yeslev paro v'rodav achreim v'kovda b'paro b'kol chelo v'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And we had seen this already back in Perek Yud, Pasuk Beis, with regard to God explaining why he hardened the heart of Pharaoh and inflicted the plagues upon Egypt, so that Klal Yisrael would know that I am the Lord. Ki ani Hashem. And now we're ready for Kriyas Yamsuf, and once again Hashem says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, v'chizakti eslev Paro, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. Now let's emphasize that the Egyptians, the Yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem, until now, it's Bnei Yisrael are witnessing the miracles of Hashem, recognizing Hashem as omnipotent, as capable of performing miracles of hashgacha for the sake of his people. And that's an imperative for the Israelis, for the Israelites, to recognize God's omnipotence, That's all obvious. But why is it necessary here for Hashem to demonstrate his miracles to the Egyptians? V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. And Rav Soloveichik suggested a whole new pshat here. He said that we in Judaism have a very fundamental principle of the faith called schar v'onesh, reward and punishment. And at the beginning, perhaps we see that the Rasha is triumphant, but we believe that ultimately he will be defeated and there will be onesh. And it's important that not only Klal Yisrael, as the beneficiaries of the miracle, will recognize God's omnipotence, but even the Mitzrim, who are the evildoers, they also must understand that they're going to be punished. Ki ani Hashem. Before the Yetzias Mitzrayim, Paro never put forth any sort of claim that he's righteous. He enslaved the people of Israel simply because that's what he could do. He was strong and the Israelites were weak. But at Kriyas Yamsuf, Paro tried to justify his actions. And he argued that Bnei Yisrael had promised to leave Mitzrayim for a 3-day excursion, and instead they fled. Paro wraps himself and presents himself in a cloak of righteousness, blaming the victims. So typical. And Hashem now demonstrates that not only does he punish obvious resha, undisguised evil, but he also, with regard to the evil that's clothed in righteousness, he will punish. And the punishment for that evil which is clothed in righteousness is even greater. In Mitzrayim, the population was punished for 10 plagues. And that's because they enslaved the Jewish people. But at Yam Suf, everyone drowned. And when does the Shira come? When does Moshe Rabbeinu sing the song? This we have to understand based on a statement in Chazal that David HaMelech wrote the first 105 Tehillim for Psalms, but not Psalm number 104, which is called Shir HaMalos. When did David HaMelech compose Shir HaMalos? Only after he recited the pasuk in chapter 104, Yitamu Chatoy Min Haaretz. Sinners will be destroyed from the earth. U'Rishoyim Odeidam, and the wicked will be no more. The ultimate Shir HaMalos could only be recited after Hashem meets out the punishment and the wicked will be no more. So to Moshe Rabbeinu did not sing the song of Kriyas Yamsuf until after evil was eradicated. He could have sung the song earlier, maybe at the time of the Exodus, but no, he waited until Kriyas Yamsuf. Why? Because the principle of reward and punishment was demonstrated to the Egyptian people. And until that point, the song of Kriyas Yamsuf, Oz Yasher, could not be sung. Only when evil was eradicated. And when schar v'onesh, as a principle of faith, was demonstrated to the Egyptian people when they went down to the bottom of the sea, then the song could be sung. Just as Chazal say that David HaMelech could only recite the Shir Malos after Itamu Chatoim min ha'oretz, evil will be eradicated. I would like to fast forward now because there's so much here on the Parsha from Rav Soloveichik. Let's take a look at the Shira for a second, which is Perek Tes Vav, and at the very beginning of the Shira, in Pasuk Beis, Aziv Zimras Ka, Vayehi Li Lishua. And then it says, Zeh Keli Me'amveil. Rav Soloveichik repeated many, many times that we really don't have the right to praise the Almighty. We're inadequate to do so. But this pasuk gives us two reasons why we have license and permission to engage in Shira and Shevach and praising the Almighty. Number one is V'anveu. V'anveu can be split into two. V'ani, ani, vehu, I and he. What does that mean? We are obligated to imitate God. And when we offer praise to God, what we're doing is we're describing the attributes of God. We're learning about God. We're appreciating his attributes. And that's ani vehu. We can only be ani vehu, meaning like him, we can fashion our deeds after divine design, but only if we see that passionate love between Hashem and his people. If we see and understand the background of our relationship, that emotion expresses itself in an overpowering longing for the complete identification of the lover with the beloved. And the obligation to follow in God's ways, as the Gemara says in Sota Yudalid, Mahu malbish harumim af ato malbish harumim mahu mevakir cholim af ato tevakir cholim, which is the obligation to imitate God. The imperative v'anveu requires man to be called by the same adjectives that one normally uses to describe God. Anivahu. Just as God is merciful and righteous and kind, so too man must be worthy of the same descriptions of merciful, righteous, and kind. This is vanvehu, anivahu, to imitate God. We imitate God when we offer praise and we learn about his attributes. We imitate God when we feel the overpowering longing that a lover feels for the beloved in the context of our relationship of passionate love. And we fulfill our obligation to imitate God, anivahu, when we describe man in the same way that we describe God. Man becomes merciful, righteous, and kind, worthy of the same descriptions of the Almighty. But then the pasuk in the end says, Elokei aviv haromenu. He is the God of my father, and I will exalt him. Rav Soloveichik says this is the second reason why we're allowed to praise Hashem. We ourselves did not originate the custom of praising Hashem. We do so based on the tradition of those who came before us. Elokei avi. We rely on their precedent. Mi kamocha ba'elam Hashem, pasuk Yud Aleph. Who is like you amongst the powerful? Rav Soloveichik says that God reveals himself in two different ways, occasionally in a very dramatic fashion. But at other times, it's ba'elim. What does it mean, ba'elim? Chazal say that ba'elim, the Gemara in Gittin on Daf Nun Vav, interprets ba'elim as be'ilim, as a mute. Who is like you amongst the mute? God is mute and passive. And we say about God that he's an erech apayim, slow to anger. Despite man's actions that would provoke an angry response, God is long-suffering, with silent acceptance of our foibles. And we too must imitate God and sometimes engage in mute, passive acceptance, meaning that we don't have the answers to all the questions. A scholar who feels an imperative to resolve all difficulties is not a scholar at all. The sons of Rabbi Akiva Eiger would recount that their father was never pained by a question, nor gladdened by an answer. He was not bothered when confronted by a difficult question, and he did not hesitate to say the question requires more thought. May God enlighten. Hashem yoyer einai. When the Gemara poses a difficult question, sometimes the response is teku, we don't know the answer. And we ask the question, God gave us the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Shouldn't it encompass all the answers? How could the Gemara come to an inconclusive conclusion? I asked my father this question, and he answered that when the Gemara says teku, it has a symbolic meaning, a metaphoric meaning. It reflects on the unresolved questions within every single individual. If a Jew never has to say teku, if all of life's questions are answered, then he's nothing more than a fool. At the same time, the ability to say teku should not change one's guiding principles. To complete and further his study, one must take note of the difficulty and then move on. Unanswerable tragedies that accompany the Jew throughout history. A Jew regularly recites a blessing upon eating and satisfying his hunger. At that moment, all is well. He's healthy, in possession of his faculties. He can readily sense the presence of God, and God reveals himself dramatically. But in cruel contrast, upon the tragic death of a loved one, as he rips his clothing at the moment of his greatest grief, a Jew recites a blessing. Baruch Hatova Meit. Baruch Dayano Emes. This expresses a person's ability to engage in passive acceptance, just as God is Ba'ilmim and not Ba'elim. He's mute and passive, slow to anger, long-suffering with the silent acceptance of man's actions that should provoke anger. And we too must imitate the Almighty. We fast forward now to Perek Tes Zayin. Pasuk Beis, Vayilonu kol hadas b'nei Yisrael al Moshe v'al Aaron b'midbar. So the people complained against Moshe. Rav Soloveichik raised the following question. How is it possible that 3 short days after the nation exclaimed, Zeh Keli v'anveu, they complained to Moshe? No matter how sublime a miracle may be, its effects on the personality are short-lived. Even the vision of God, as experienced at Yam Suf, was insufficient to sustain the inspiration. And why? Based on the Gemara Bava Kama, the people lack Torah. The Pasuk in Yeshaya says, called Sameh L'chula Mayim, all who are thirsty should come and drink. One who lacks Torah is thirsty. A basic need is missing. The lack of Torah results in lethargy, and depression. Bnei Yisrael's personalities were incomplete without Torah. And the people complained as a result. Although the chiyuv of Talmud Torah was not made formally until Har Sinai, but here at Mara, Moshe Rabbeinu instituted the Torah reading 3 days a week, meaning there should not be a 3-day weekly period without hearing the words of Torah. The mere listening to the Torah reading was sufficient to satisfy their basic needs. Perek Tes Zayin Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayehi ba'erev atal aslav atchasa machne, etc. Came to pass in the evening that the quails went up and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew. Okay, this is a long discussion. I don't know if we'll have time for it. I'm just looking for something that might be a little bit shorter. No, I don't find anything. Okay, then, I think, with your permission, we'll stop here. Even though, again, this we can go on and on for hours here. There's so much material. But Rav Soloveichik, even in terms of the Shiras Hayam, had so many insights. I mean, we just touched on the tip of the iceberg. All right, then. So let me wish you a great day, and lehitraot, as we say.